Hi, I'm Mary from VFT, and you are joining me today to sew up the Luna pattern. If you are joining us from our new beginner bundle that we have, learning how to sew just for a brand new beginner, this is video number 2. So you'll have already completed your willow skirt and you're moving along to your Luna dress. If you just found this video on the internet and you're not sure why I'm talking about that bundle, this is also a great pattern for you to follow along with if you're looking for a new dress option for your little one. Luna actually has exterior pockets that are super cute for if you're wanting to do some pattern matching or just adding detail to that exterior edge of it. It also features a closure in the back that doesn't need a zipper or a button. So this is a great pattern if you're new and you're not sure yet if you're ready to try and tackle a button or a zipper. This dress is really, really cute and it's really easy to put together. So let's learn a few new techniques. We're gonna attach our bodice to a skirt or gathered skirt. And like I said, we'll also be working on a placket for the back. But this is a great pattern to start on if you're new to sewing, or if you're an experienced seamstress and you would like something to add to your collection that's a quick sew, this is a good pattern for that as well. So let's jump in and start on our Luna dress.
Okay, so first off, let's review our pattern pieces here. We're going to have 4 of our bodice back pieces. So 2 will be our main layers and 2 will be our lining layers. And then we're going to have 2 of our bodice front pieces. This is cut on the fold. So we need to have 1 that's the main and then 1 that is the lining. Then we have our ties, our back tie pieces, if you're going to do the tie version. If you're doing buttons, you won't have those, but you will have the back tie pieces if you're doing ties like I am. And then we also have our placket piece if you're going to do the placket. And then if you're going to do the pockets, you'll need to have 4 of those pieces cut out. 2 are the main and 2 are the lining. And then after that, we have our 2 skirt panels. So let's get started with our sewing. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on creating our bodice main and our bodice linings. So we're going to take our bodice main and lay that open flat facing upwards so we see the right side facing us. And then we're going to layer the 2 back bodice pieces on top of that with the right sides touching each other. So here we will go ahead and pin together along these shoulder seams and then sew along that seam where you have it pinned. So here we have the bodice now sewn together at this shoulder seam. I have also done this for my lining layer as well, which I'm using the same fabric, but one is the lining and one is the main. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, we're not going to trim off this seam allowance, we're actually going to open it up and then we're going to iron it flat right inside this seam allowance there. Okay, so I've now got these seams ironed flat. They're nice and open here. So now that we have that done, we can go ahead and set these 2 bodice pieces aside while we create our ribbon ties, our straps for the back. If you are not going to be creating the ribbon ties, then like if you're doing the button version instead, you're going to go ahead and skip down to step number 9 in your tutorial. So to create our ties, we're going to go ahead and fold one of our ties in half widthwise, with the right sides touching together, and we're going to iron it flat. Then we'll go ahead and pin this along the long open edge and one of the shorter ends, leaving the opposite end open for turning it. So we'll do that with both of our tie pieces, and then we're going to go ahead and sew along those pinned edges. Okay, now that we've got those sewn, what we're going to do is we need to go ahead and trim off our seam allowance, so trim it back by half. We want to go ahead and clip the corner as well. This corner edge that you've sewn, if you don't kind of cut an angle there at it, it can get a little bunched up once you turn it, and it won't give you a nice crisp squared edge there if you do not trim this back. So you do want to be sure to trim it. Don't cut into your stitch line, of course, but cut into that as closely as you can. And then, like I said, we'll go ahead and continue to cut off half of the seam allowance back on both of these tie pieces. And then once we've done that, it's time to go ahead and turn them right side out. Now you can use a turning tool for this, or like I've got just a pencil I'm using to turn this inside out with. But just go ahead and get those turned right side out. And then we will go ahead and top stitch along those 3 edges. So the edge that's open, you don't just have top stitch there because it will be sewn onto the bodice. Now that we have our ties created, we're going to go ahead and take our bodice main, the main, not our lining, but our main bodice, and we're going to pin our ties to the back bodice pieces. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to, from the top of the back bodice, so where the neckline is, we'll measure down 3/4 of an inch from that top raw edge, and then that is where the back tie should line up with that 3/4 of an inch mark. So we'll go ahead and pin that with the raw edges lining up, and we will sew a basting stitch to secure both of those back ties in place. Now that I have those ties basted in place, I'm also going to go ahead and add the button loop for the optional button. I like this style with a little button below the ties just for fun. So you create the button loop by cutting a 2.5 inch piece of elastic, and you'll just fold that elastic in half, creating a loop, and you pin it on the left side of the bodice back. You'll measure up 1 inch from the bottom raw edge of this bodice back, and once you measure up 1 inch, that's where you're going to pin that little elastic loop in place. And then you'll go ahead and sew that with a basting stitch to secure it in place, just like we did with the ties. Now that we've got that loop in place, we're going to go ahead and fold up our back ties and pin them into the center of each bodice back so they're not loose. And this is really important because as we attach the lining to this, we don't want to accidentally get our ties caught into a seam that we're sewing and not realize it. So just fold them up and pin them right in the middle of the back bodice so they're out of the way and you don't accidentally catch them when you're sewing. So once you've got those pinned, we'll go ahead and layer our lining over our main layer with our right sides touching. So the two right sides will be facing each other, and we will pin all up the back of the bodice, around the neckline, and then back down the other side of the bodice back. We'll pin that there, and then after we have that pinned, then we are going to pin along the two armholes as well. So once you have both of the armholes pinned up, then we will go ahead and sew along all of these edges that we just pinned together. Once we've got those edges all sewn together, we are going to trim off half of our seam allowance, and we're going to clip the corners and into the angles of all of these seams. So it's very important that when you're clipping in the angles that you don't cut all the way through your stitch line, of course, but you want to get as close as you can because it's going to help it lay really nice and flat and give it a good finish with no puckering at the angles, like in the squared neckline here, once we turn it right side out. So definitely take care whenever you're cutting into the corners and the angles, but do make sure that you go ahead and trim back the seam allowance so that we have a nice flat bodice and neckline. Once we get all of the seam allowances trimmed back, then we will go ahead and remove the pins that we have holding our back ties in place. So pull out those pins, and then we get to turn this right side out, which is always so fun getting to see how things are looking. After it's turned right side out, then you'll want to go ahead and give it a really good press. We want to have our edges nice and crisp. You don't want to have it like bunched or gathered, and sometimes you realize where you need to pull more of the seam out. So give it a nice good press, and then we're going to work on attaching our sides. To do this, we're going to go ahead and open up our main and our lining layers. So around, you can see here I have it folded to where you can tell where the back is and the front is. We want to go ahead and open up the lining and the main of the front, and then the lining and the main of the back, and match them up along this little rectangle that we've created here. So you'll see this little cutout space. We'll go ahead and match that with the matching back piece. And once we've got those lined up, we will pin along those edges and then sew. After we've sewn there, we're going to go ahead and trim off half of our seam allowance, and we want to clip into the angles for the corner here so that we can get a nice crisp fold here. So after we've clipped, like I said, carefully, so you don't want to clip into your stitch line, then we'll fold our bodice back down and we'll iron it flat. And here you'll now see how you have created the sleeves here. That's the bottom of the bodice is all aligned as one solid line, and we have sleeves, little armholes. So we are going to go ahead and continue on now with creating our pockets. If you're not going to create pockets for your version, then you can go ahead and skip down to step number 19 in your tutorial. So for our pockets, we're going to place 2 of our pockets together with the right sides touching and the raw edges lining up. And we are going to clip or pin along the circle edge and along the 2 long edges. So along the bottom of the pocket and then the side edge. After you've done that, you'll go ahead and sew along those edges that we just pinned. After you've sewn along those edges, then we're going to go ahead and trim off half of the seam allowance, and we're going to go ahead and clip the corners and also just clip a couple of notches into the curved edge so that you can keep a nice curved, like smooth line there. It doesn't gather or pucker up any. So once you've clipped all of that back, then we'll go ahead and turn the pockets right side out and iron them flat. If you want to, you can then top stitch around the curved pocket edge. But I actually realized, my daughter, she asked me if I could add some of this flower detail, this lace I have to this dress. And so I thought it would be really cute along the pocket edge, which honestly, in this pattern, the pockets are such a fun thing to add your own little details to. You can add pom-poms or lace or any fun trim. So this is really just a great spot to add a little bit of detail that, customization for exactly what you'd like. So now that we have our pockets done, we are going to attach them onto our skirt front panel. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and take the skirt front and we're going to lay it flat with the right side facing up at us. And we're going to take both the pockets and align them to the side and the top edge of that panel. So you don't have to measure over. It's nice. You're just going to literally stick it where it fits as far as along the top and the side edge. Once you have them pinned in place, then you're going to sew the pocket to the skirt around the outer edge of the pocket and then along the bottom of it. You'll leave the top and the curved side open, so you don't want to sew along that curved edge. So we're just sewing along the side edge of the pocket and the bottom edge of it. You can then also sew a second row of stitches, a quarter of the way from the first row of stitches for a fun little detailed look. And then after we've got that done, we can go ahead and attach our back skirt piece onto this front skirt panel so that we create our full skirt. We'll go ahead and take our back panel and lay it on top of our front panel with the right sides touching, and we'll pin along those 2 edges and sew there. You'll also want to, after you've sewn, you'll want to go ahead and either finish it with a serger, or you can trim back your seam allowance by half and then do a zigzag stitch along the edge. But either way, you'll want to go ahead and finish off that edge so that you don't have any fraying of the fabric there. And now that we have the skirt sewn together, it is time to create our placket. Now, a placket is such a great tool to be able to use in many garment sewings, not only in skirts, but also if you're creating sleeves. Knowing how to do a placket for like a long sleeve is great. It's actually much easier than I think it gets. It has a bad rap for being difficult to do plackets, but they're really very simple. So let's do this together. The first thing we'll want to do is we want to find the center of our back skirt panel. So I folded it in half and then ironed it, created a nice little crease so I could see right where the center of that back skirt panel was. And then we're going to cut down the middle of that skirt back crease by 2 1/4 inches. So once you have that cut down, you're going to go ahead and open the fabric up, and we'll go ahead and create a straight line all the way across that line that we just cut. We're going to go ahead and open it to where it's flat. I like to lay it against the grid on my cutting mat just so I see how it's nice and straight. But we're just going to create a straight line with that cut that we have there. And then we're going to take our placket piece that we'd cut, and we're going to lay it on top of this line that we just created. We're going to pin it with the right side of your placket should be touching the wrong side of the skirt back. So that sounds kind of confusing, but just take it slow and you can work it out with you have the right side of the placket is touching the wrong side of the skirt back. Then you'll go ahead and pin it along that edge. And you want to be careful here. I'm showing you that if you, I'd pinned it without checking the underside, and then I realized I didn't quite have that little center where the cut is into my pinned edge. It was still like too far pulled back. So you want to make sure you get all the way up to the very cut edge and whenever you have this pinned here, so that when we sew it, we're using only a 1/8 inch seam allowance. We want to make sure that cut edge is completely inside of our seam that we create. So this is just a really good spot to take it slow and make sure you pin it all together. After we've sewn it, then we're going to go ahead and iron the seam allowance towards the placket. Like pull the placket up and iron it to where the seam allowance goes towards the placket. And then we'll go ahead and fold the open long raw edge of that placket down by approximately 1 1/8 inch. And we'll iron it flat, and then we'll fold it over again just until it covers the seam that we created, and we'll iron that flat. Now we can sew this placket right along that folded edge. Now that we have it sewn together, we can go ahead and trim off any excess that we might have that overhangs of the placket. That's not needed, so you can trim that back if you'd like at this point. And then we get to fold this placket to where it folds into itself. So you're going to fold the left side of the placket back to match the skirt, and you'll baste that in place, and then you can see how this now allows the placket to lay flat with that left side being turned in and basted. Now it's time to go ahead and gather up the top of our skirt to the width of our bodice. So to do this, it will be a little different if you're doing the pocket version or if you're just doing the regular skirt. If you're doing just the regular skirt, you will go ahead and just sew 2 rows of gathering stitches all along that top raw edge and gather it up to the width of your bodice. Now, if you're doing the pocket version like I am, it will be a little different process for gathering. But the very first thing that I always do, no matter which method you're going or which skirt you're doing, you want to find the center of your skirt panel front and mark it so that you're able to line that up with the center of your bodice, and you know you're keeping them like the gathers very even along the front edge. So first off, we found the center point, midway point of the bodice in the skirt. And then what I'm going to do is you're going to have 2 rows of stitches in between your pockets, and then 2 rows of stitches from your pockets over to your back placket edge, or the center of your skirt back if you don't have a placket. These stitches do not need to go over the top of your pockets because we are not going to be gathering our pockets at all. Like, the pockets need to stay flat. So make sure when you're starting and stopping your gathering stitches that you're not including the top edge of your pocket in there at all. So after we have the top of our skirt gathered up to where it is the same width of our bodice, then we are going to be ready to go to attach our bodice to our gathered skirt. Here I am pinning our bodice onto our gathered skirt with the right sides touching. Now I use lots of pins and keep the gathering spaced out really evenly here. This is just a great time to pay attention to the spacing that you have on everything, making sure your side seams are aligned, and then that midway point that we'd marked with the pin is aligned. Everything is lined up so you have even gathering and even spacing where it should be for your pockets. So you just want to pay attention to where you're clipping it and get it all pinned nicely in place so you have the spacing right. After you've got it all pinned together and you're happy with your spacing on that, what we're going to do is we're going to sew together along this pinned seam. Now, after you've sewn it, you want to either serge that edge or trim off half of your seam allowance and finish it with a zigzag stitch. After you've done that, we're going to go ahead and iron the seam up towards the bodice and then turn the dress right side out. Isn't this so fun to see? Once it's right side out, you'll want to give it a nice press with the seam allowance facing up, and you're going to go ahead and top stitch along that edge so you catch the seam allowance up into that bodice. Then we're going to go ahead and hem the bottom of our skirt, which we do that by turning it under by 1/4 inch and then another 1 inch for a nice deep hem. And I just love whenever you have the deeper hem on a skirt like this and you can see on bottom. I think it's a really nice detail. It looks, I don't know, it's such a pretty hemline. Now the very last detail to do is our buttons along the back. If you did a full button back, you'll go ahead and use the settings on your machine for creating your buttonholes and your buttons. I just did the ties with the 1 button loop. So I'm going to go ahead and add 1 little button on back here. And then voila, we are done with our sweet little Luna dress. What do you think?